John, welcome to the Fiduciary U Podcast. I am super excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Josh. Very happy to be here with you.
Well, you are somebody I have a tremendous amount of respect for in the industry, and you've been in the industry a long time, I think probably 30 plus years or so, and obviously running FI360 now, but Morningstar as well, kind of in your background. Maybe talk briefly for those of listening that may not know much about you or know much about your background. Tell a little bit about your story and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Thanks again for having me, Josh. So I studied finance in college, undergrad, and thought that I wanted to be a financial advisor. I interned at one of the wirehouses when I was in college, and had a really interesting experience there. Learned the difference between fiduciary and non-fiduciary advisors back then. In 1990, I think it was when I interned, and ended up not going into finance right out of college. Went into technology, Anderson Consulting, but then transitioned back into into finance later, and had that kind of hybrid finance technology experience at a very large asset manager, Brinson Partners, that was bought by UBS, and then eventually Morningstar, and now FI360. So very early interest in finance, very early interest in financial advising, and I would say really a lot of interest in supporting financial advisors. So I'm more of a support staff kind of individual as opposed to being a player, certainly in the financial advisor space, but it's that combination of technology and finance interest that brought me to where I am today.
And so when did you start working at Morningstar? I mean, you had to be fairly early on to the Morningstar years.
So I started at Morningstar in July of 2001.
Okay.
And there were
good
several
timing.
hundred people there. Yeah. So I was there, before we went public in May of 2005. Really incredible organization, very much focused on doing the right thing for investors first and foremost. So it was a great 14 or 15 years I had there.
And from there, you went directly to FI360. Or did you make a stop in between?
So I did some consulting after I left Morningstar, and my good friend Matt Wolnowitz, who had left Morningstar a year or two before me and went to FI360, brought me over to FI360 as a consultant initially, and then eventually I came on full time and ran product and strategy.
Love Wolney, also a former Fiduciary U guest, such a great guy, and actually with what he's doing now with Income America, we'll talk a little bit about that later in the show, and some of the things that both you personally are doing, kind of industry wise, with guaranteed income, and also I think what FI360 how FI360 is thinking about the possibility of guaranteed income out in the market. What was the biggest difference in going from probably a much bigger organization like a Morningstar to an FI360?
Well, it's really interesting. When I started at Morningstar, it was not the Morningstar that I left. When I started, there were a few hundred people there. We were not a public organization. We had some private equity funding us. So it was a different scale when I started versus when I left. When I came to FI360, we were owned by private equity, maybe 70 or 80 individuals at the time. So in a lot of ways, it reminded me of that Morningstar kind of early 2000s experience that I had, where you had to wear a lot of hats, different challenges, different opportunities, absolutely incredible energy, and a great leadership from Rich Lynch, who's one of the founders of FI360, who's actually still there now. He's going to be leaving at the end of this year. But I think going to FI360 when I did really reinvigorated me. And I see that energy that we had 7 years ago or so is still there. And that's what continues to fuel me now.
No, I think that's great. So, and I was have been an AIF since I think maybe 2005, 2006 was an early FI360, toolkit user when I had my firm and practice as well. And how have you seen kind of the evolution of fintech and kind of tools for advisors? Like, how have you seen that change over let's say the last maybe 5 or 10 years? And where do you see it going in the future? Where do you see the opportunities and needs for advisors in the future from a fintech perspective?
Yeah. So one of the trends that I see in the last 5 or 10 years that I'm really excited about is practitioners or former practitioners like yourself getting involved in the space. I mentioned I'm more of I've always been a support individual. I worked in financial services for an asset management firm, for a trust firm. I was an officer on a closed-end bond fund, but I never had a book of business. I never served as a financial advisor. And it's really exciting from my perspective to see individuals like you who know where the challenges were from a technology perspective when they were working, and you're helping address those issues for your former peers, now clients. I think that's really exciting. So I think there's the way that technology has been democratized. It's easier to do it, I think, today than it would have been 20 years ago or 30 years ago, certainly, and probably even easier than 5 years ago. It's really great to see the connectedness between the people that are creating these solutions and their awareness of the communities that they're serving. So I think current advisors, former advisors developing tools for their peers is a trend that I don't see slowing down. And that's something I'm really excited about. Another trend that I see is more collaboration among fintech firms where historically there's been some of this kind of elbowing out, like, hey, I'm going to do everything for everyone. And I think there's a realization that in this day and age, there's great opportunities for specialization and collaboration. So we've had some great partnerships with organizations where we're trying to create more seamless workflows between one application and another. And I think that's going to continue as well too. I still think that in financial services we're behind. If you look at what happens just in general with individual consumer technology, the pace of change, the scale, and the like of change is a lot faster for my daughters and, the applications they're using versus what a lot of financial advisors get their hands on. So I still think we have a ways to go, but I think that some of the innovation that we're seeing more mass market is going to make its way in an increasing pace.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I even think about that, to go back to that collaboration piece that you talked about. You look at 20 years ago, and you had Microsoft and Apple were like mortal enemies, right? They were, and it was kind of this kind of closed ecosystem, right? You were either Apple or you were Windows, and now it's more of this, probably frenemy type. You think about with Microsoft, like they basically said, hey, we're going to design Office apps, if you will, that are going to work really, really well on Apple and Mac and iOS products. And so there is that kind of collaboration. And at the end of the day, it's more of like a rising tide raises all ships. And so this collaborative approach, instead of kind of maybe co-opetition, maybe that's another way to describe it, instead of just total competition. I think that's actually good for the marketplace. I think people want like some freedom and some flexibility, and it's just not one or the other. It's really hard. I know, even as being an advisor, when you have to plant your flag, it's much better if things can kind of coexist, and you can maybe take the best of all worlds and kind of bring them together. Why do you think financial services technology, though, is it regulatory? Is it compliance? Is it just age of users? Like, what do you think is the reason that in our industry adoption of technology maybe is slower than what we see out in the other industries or out in the marketplace?
I think compliance is certainly an issue, and not just regulatory compliance, as we maybe think about it from a Department of Labor, ERISA, SEC perspective, but compliance from a financial technology perspective in terms of some of the things that home offices are burdened with, making sure that applications meet certain hurdles before they can be rolled out to 1,000 advisors or 10,000 advisors. I think that plays a role. I think there's also the fact that there aren't a ton of individuals that have the experience that you have, for example, that are designing applications for financial advisors. So again, I think that trend is going to continue. I've seen some great success with that in the past. I think that's going to help. So I think that's an issue. And I think there's some tentativeness from some organizations as well, too, maybe because they don't have that expertise. And it's like, how big of a bet are we going to place on financial advisors for this service or that service, unless we know we're going to be successful? So I think it's really a confluence of things. But getting back to your point about that co-opetition, I think maybe one final trend that I'm seeing is a greater focus on serving clients, being very client-centric, as opposed to kind of fighting your competition. And I think that's where that co-opetition comes in, that collaboration with technology firms when they really focus on what they need to do to give a better experience to the end advisor user, whether that means building something new, plugging something in. I think that mindset has really been welcomed by a lot of organizations. And I think the aggregators are helping with that. If you look at the challenges that they're facing, where they're bringing in a lot of advisors that are using all these different systems and services, they want to find a way to keep them happy in the immediate term and bring things together long term. So I think the aggregators and the nature of their business models are forcing us to have more of these discussions than we've had in the past.
No, I think that's really, really good insight. And it's been interesting what I've even seen now kind of in this, with building technology. My whole thing was I was always looking for ways to, I viewed technology as an investment, not as an expense, and looking for ways to do things better, to do things more efficiently, to do things with better scale. If I could find a product that worked, great. If I couldn't, I basically would build something for myself to solve problems that I had. It's been interesting now, though, seeing and dealing with lots of firms from RIAs to independent broker-dealers to aggregators. Like, I'm totally with you. The aggregators are really pushing the envelope, in my opinion. They are very focused on innovation. They are very focused on giving their advisors the tools and the resources they need to compete effectively, because in most cases, they're very growth-minded. And, it's interesting. RIAs in general, smaller RIAs in some ways, and I wrote an article about this for 401k specialists, but I think they view technology as an expense in a lot of cases. And the smaller RIAs, a lot of times, it's interesting, they may be more hesitant to invest, not realizing that their competition out there is accelerating a lot more quickly than they probably think. But I've also seen the same thing, and this is for home offices with broker-dealers. The feedback I hear from the field in general, from advisors, is, and not naming any names, but that home offices in general, that they're either building things that aren't necessarily valued by advisors, or they're prioritizing the wrong things, or it just takes forever to get things approved. I think, to your point, that kind of slowing that from an adoption standpoint. And so, I think the real opportunity out there for any firm, like you need, whether you're an independent broker dealer, whether you're an RIA, whether you're one of the aggregators, is technology. Like, that is that is the way you're going to scale. That's the way you're going to deliver an efficient experience. That's the way you're going to deliver consistency. I think that's one of the things I hear from the larger firms is, how do we deliver and make sure that our advisors are doing things consistently across the board, where there's not a lot of kind of one-offs and whatnot. So it is interesting. I would just argue too that the age of, we have this graying industry. Now I got the gray in my beard. It's funny. Like I talk to a lot of younger advisors now. And younger, I'm like 35. If I say like 35, I'm like, man, I'm one of the older guys now, which is a bit of a different experience. But I think in general, what I've seen is younger advisors are much more open to leveraging technology. They're more of like digital natives, whereas older advisors are more, hey, I'm maybe on the back nine of my career, or I'm not real comfortable changing things or doing things differently. So I would say in general, like financial services is more of a laggard technology wise, but I think the winners of tomorrow are going to be the ones who are much more forward thinking and willing to view technology as an opportunity and not as kind of a potential roadblock.
Totally agree. Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of scale benefits that you get from it, and those firms that are innovating and that are working towards that next generation are going to position themselves well for sure.
So let's talk a little bit about, and obviously both you and I have a dog in the fight there now that we both sell technology. So obviously we're going to, I know for me, but I'm embracing it more and more now in seeing what technology can do. So again, kind of learning point for advisors is really be thinking about how you invest in technology, and realize your competitors are. So to keep up, you need to be smart about where you're placing bets and what you're doing. But one of the cool things I recently saw on LinkedIn that went around was something that you're doing and getting involved with around retirement income. And I think you just joined the kind of industry advisory board for, is it RIS is the retirement income style awareness? Isn't there like a protocol that like Wade Fowle, is it Wade Fowle?
RISA, yeah.
RISA. Okay. So
yes,
talk a little bit about what that is.
So it's essentially a categorization system for retirement income. So there's 4 quadrants that they've developed, and from an analogy perspective, you can think about it maybe akin to a Morningstar style box for retirement income. And I had the pleasure of meeting Wade and Alex. Michelle Richter introduced me to them earlier in 2022. And in 2022, we actually started a retirement income consortium, Broadridge FI360 did, where we've got the largest players in asset management and insurance that are working to make retirement income more available within DC plans. So this was one of the discussions that I had earlier this year, and I was really intrigued with what they've done. It's the only academically vetted, empirical data supported methodology that I've seen to help someone decide which type of retirement income solution best fits them. So when they asked me to join their board, I jumped at the chance. I am very impressed not only with the academic rigor that they have behind their solution, but they're also quite pragmatic with how they're thinking about how they roll this out and how they implement it. They focused a lot on individuals taking these assessments, but I'm really excited at taking that technology, helping them take that technology and apply it towards QDIAs, for example. So thinking about how you can really increase the uptake of retirement income where it makes sense. So it's really, really cool, innovative stuff that those two have put together.
Yeah, and I know some of the other industry players. I think, is it Ryan Beach from Orion, I think, is on that board, and then Bonnie Treichel from Endeavor. I see Bonnie all over the place. It's a pretty distinguished group of people. And so what kind of, as being part of that board, like what does that look like in terms of like function for you?
Well,
what are you doing?
Well, it's a part-time advisory role. We're actually going to have our first meeting in January. So I'll tell you, if you have me back on, I'll tell you after January exactly, what it means there. But, in general, it's giving guidance to this startup organization, maybe making introductions, helping them figure out go-to-market strategies and the like. And I've had a few conversations with them already. Certainly very excited about what they're doing. Doesn't conflict with what I'm doing at Broadridge, with FI360 at all. If anything, it's very complementary to all that.
No, that's great. And where do you see, you've got ESG now, right? With some of the recent guidance, you've got guaranteed income. Where do you see, whether both at FI360 or in general, what do you think the next evolution of tools are to kind of address those type of areas? In some ways, kind of the old tools, may or may not be sufficient to help advisors now that need to help their clients do a deeper level of due diligence. How do you think about that? And
Sure.
And how does FI360 think about where you're going to kind of meet the needs of advisors and their clients in that area?
That's great softball question for me. I appreciate that one. And I'm going to go in reverse order, and I'm going to start.
I'm teeing you up, John. I'm teeing you up.
You teed that up really well for me. Thank you. So with regards to ESG, we actually won a Wealthies Award from wealthmanagement.com this last September for our integration of ESG factors along with our fiduciary score in the FI360 toolkit, Investments Greener. If you look at the Department of Labor rule, which just came out a week or two ago, they're basically saying you can use ESG in 401k plans if you want, in retirement plans if you want. You don't have to, but you need to address all of the fiduciary requirements first and foremost. And some of the objections that we've seen to that rule that have come out, I think are still kind of along those same lines. It's like, hey, make sure that you take care of the fiduciary considerations first. Some of these rules are not necessarily precluding you from using ESG. Some are, but not all. And that's where I think the partnership we have with Owl Analytics is really neat. They're an ESG factor identification and scoring firm. And this concept of identifying good fiduciary funds and then your ESG criteria separately and looking at maybe the Venn diagram intersection is something that I think is powerful. Wealthmanagement.com agreed, or that selection committee agreed. I think where those tools are going to go for us anyway is that we're going to add more information on reports and more data points. Right now we've got four high-level ESG data points we allow people to search on, and that's kind of it. So I think integrating that into reports, allowing for the more granular data points associated with ESG is something that's going to come next for us. And that really aligns with that personalization trend that we're seeing in the industry, where if you personalize a portfolio for someone, they're a lot more likely to stick with it. So even if you don't believe in any investment benefits, if you're at least neutral from an investment benefit kind of explicitly with ESG factors, there's a personalization benefit, there's a behavioral benefit that I see by using ESG to get people kind of more aligned with their holdings, to get them thinking more long term. We know that one of the greatest benefits that you get working with a financial advisor is they help you not sell when things are low and not buy when things are high. And I think some of this personalization can help with that. So that's where we're going on the ESG front.
So, one of the things that I hear from advisors is, and with a lot of things, there's a lot of, as an industry, we get excited about, there's a lot of kind of sizzle. A lot of times there isn't, at least right away, much stake behind it. It takes time for trends. I mean, I use like 330A as an example. Well, people have been talking about 330A. I talked about it in my book in 2008, Fixing the 401k. It took a long time for that to really get kind of embraced at the client level. Now it's much more common, but it's been 15, 17 years. It's been an evolution. I think it's the same way ESG, from what I'm hearing from advisors, is it may come up as a discussion point with clients, but there hasn't been a huge embrace of it so far. Certainly you have some types of companies where it is a really big focus. And so I think it probably will take time to work its way in. I think it's the same way from a guaranteed income standpoint. I think regulatory guidance is really helpful for just kind of drawing the lines in the sand and helping people understand, like, what's in bounds and what's out of bounds. But and I'd love to get your thoughts. I think with this RISA and whatnot is really interesting. I think guaranteed income, we're still in the very early innings, just like ESG, but I think the very early innings, the first or second inning, might even still be in spring training when it comes to kind of adoption of guaranteed income and ESG strategies. That's just kind of what I'm hearing. And so I think for advisors, the learning point is, one, needing to have tools to do that type of analysis. More importantly, they'll have those conversations with clients. You want to be the first one to have a conversation with a client. You want them to hear it from you. You don't want them to hear it from, one of your competitors. So even if the decision is, Hey, we're going to hold off for the time being, you should be having those conversations with clients and, having tools, like from an FI360 or other technology providers that can enable you to facilitate those conversations, even if the decision is, hey, we're going to hold tight for a while, I think is really, really important. But I think from a learning perspective, or the takeaway is, you want to be proactive about having those conversations with your clients and these new trends and guidance and best practices, not having them hear it from somebody else. So I guess that would be my kind of overall perspective.
Yeah, no, I think those are great points. And I think, you talk about technology being an investment, not an expense. And I think about that with training as well, too. So the time that you spend watching a webinar, listening to your podcast, those are investments. And everyone's time, I mean, that's the most valuable thing that we have. The older I get, that certainly resonates even more with me. And I agree with you. I think one of the big challenges with uptake if we take ESG specifically, is that I mentioned I see a lot of the benefits. I hear about a lot of the benefits associated with that personalization. So if you're talking about this in the context of retirement plans, and we certainly help advisors with wealth accounts and foundations and endowments, it's not just 401k plans, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to put something in there that will resonate with 1,000 participants. And perhaps, you've got an affinity towards social issues, and I've got an affinity towards environmental issues. So how do you scale that personalization within a plan with ESG? So we've had some conversations with folks on that. I think that's a real challenge. It's not necessarily, one size fits all with ESG. So I do think it's going to take a while for that to evolve. And I think you should think about being proportional with the opportunity or the need in the investment that you make in tools and in training on those things specifically. You're a longstanding AIF, and I'm very appreciative for that. And I think that all of the webinars that we do are made available for free to anyone. We often have webinars on ESG, and we have actually a ton on retirement income. So we started that Retirement Income Consortium at the beginning of this year with a lot of like-minded industry professionals that want to do the right thing for participants. They, you saw in the Secure Act of 2019, there was some help with the safe harbor for the selection of an annuity provider, which is one of the challenges or concerns advisors had with recommending retirement income. And then there was guidance at the end of 2021 from the Department of Labor where they said increased access to retirement income within plans is one of our top goals for 2022. So the regulators, very clearly signaling, hey, this is something that we want you industry folks to figure out. And then on top of that, if you look at PTE 2020-02, the IRA rollover regulation that went into effect on July 1st of this year, regulators are wanting to be really careful now, holding more advisors, more actions to a fiduciary standard of care when you're doing a rollover. So I think there is this very clear messaging from regulators that we've got an issue with people outliving their retirement savings. Mm-hmm. That's something we want you to figure out. And we're seeing some good traction now with record keepers, for example, seeing opportunity from advisors. There's more being asked about retirement income solutions. We're seeing innovation with new products coming out that have better portability characteristics and the like, but there still is a long way to go. So I agree with you. It's early innings, but we're seeing some good progress being made. I'm going to speak to several very accomplished advisors at the end of next week on what their specific needs are. But that's what FI360 is trying to help the industry and developing tools actually for retirement income consideration as well too. We've got prudent practices that we're developing with the consortium, and we will be developing a tool that helps you select a retirement income solution, just like you select a target date fund or a large cap growth fund. And that should be live by the end of 2023.
Okay. Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point around just product needing to and solutions needing to catch up. And getting back to like guaranteed income as an example, definitely a focus. I think a lot of progress, and I anticipate there's going to be meaningful adoption down the road. But there needs to be it is a very good point. I even think about like Pension Protection Act of 2006, right? That's when Congress basically said, hey, we want to green light auto enrollment and auto escalation, right? And default investing with QDIAs and whatnot. And that took time to get implemented. We saw it, and it now there's a ton of momentum behind it. That was less product focused, though, I guess you could say, from a target date fund. That really kind of opened the doors to proliferation of target date product. But I think that's a really good point, is now with regulatory guidance and with really the bigger players in the industry starting to get behind. I think ESG is an example. I think what you could see is managed accounts actually could really help from a personalization standpoint. It's hard to get a target date fund. It's going to be, it's kind of a one size fits none. I mean, you're going to hit a lot of the population, but managed accounts really can drive that personalization. That's potentially where firms will start to build in. Maybe you have like an ESG model or managed account and a non-ESG, and depending upon the needs of the participant and what's important to them, they can kind of select into what that looks like. So, where do you see the? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, go, please.
No, I was done. I was gonna shift, but what are your thoughts there in terms of it? It sounds like building on that personalization, where you think kind of the future is.
Well, I love that. Yeah. On the ESG front, to your point, I think managed accounts, not only just like an ESG and a non-ESG managed account, I could see folks launching a socially focused managed account, an environmental, a governance focused managed account, and non, ESG options as well too. So maybe you have 4. So I think there's ways you can try to get a little bit more personalization and still have something that's scalable to the masses. So I think that's spot on. And I think that I'm extremely aligned with you with your reference to the Pension Protection Act and what that did for adoption of target date funds and what we need to do with retirement income solutions. I think associating those solutions with the default solution, whether it's a QDIA or not, but somehow defaulting folks, I think is required. It was, really smart behavioral economists, Dick Thaler and Shlomo Benazzi that worked on that aspect of auto enrollment with that Pension Protection Act. And as much as I love to think that we can educate plan participants, I think the most pragmatic way to get them where they should be is to default them into certain solutions. And that's the real challenge now. It's not necessarily getting these retirement income solutions in the plans. It's getting everyone to sign up for them.
Yeah, I completely agree. There has to be kind of that, you even see that now with target date funds. When target date funds, are the default, you see it around managed accounts. Like when something is the default, it gets a lot of flow. When it's just added as an option, the utilization is much, much lower. And I do probably think target date, and this is where we talked about Matt, Wolnowitz and whatnot, what they're doing with Income America. I think building it in as part of kind of like a target date fund is probably a good strategy, because you're gonna get flow that way. If you just leave it as kind of a standalone, I think it's going to be really, really hard. So where do you see the future of fiduciary going? Over the next 5 or 10 years? That's something I admire tremendously about you, is your commitment to fiduciary principles. Where do you think that's going over the next 5 to 10 years? And what do advisors really need to do to kind of get ahead of the curve from that perspective?
Sure. And I'll say at the end of 2021, for the first time, there were more fee-based advisors and hybrid advisors than there were commissioned advisors. So this fiduciary trend is real, and we kind of flipped we flipped over to a more fiduciary centric world as of last December. And I see no signs of that slowing down. One of the things that's interesting during the Trump administration, when you saw some pushback maybe at the federal level with some of these fiduciary regulations, you saw a lot of states say, hey, if you're not going to do this at the federal level, we're going to do it at the state level. So I believe if you are a fiduciary advisor, you're on the right side of the trend, but more importantly, you're on the right side of your clients. So I think we're going to continue in the same manner that we've seen over the last several years. And it's interesting that we saw a great increase in our AIF designees and interest in our fiduciary training, even after the DOL rule was vacated in May of 2018. And I think there's this realization that, it's inevitable. It's the right thing to do. If your doctor does the right thing for you, has to do the right thing for you, your lawyer, your accountant, why not your financial advisor? So I think we're gonna continue along and see probably more regulation, and just more activities that push us towards a more unified fiduciary standard.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, at the end of the day, if you always stay kind of focused on doing the right thing for people, like it's a better way to live, but it also has a lot of benefits. I think from a business perspective, and I think that to that point, and I love kind of hearing that statistic around. And you get a lot of people that argue around commission or fee or what that looks like. I mean, when you can eliminate conflicts of interest and create maybe not perfect alignment, but greater alignment with clients, ultimately, I think that business model wins out. And I've just always admired you as I think an advocate of fiduciary principles, and really FI360 being kind of ahead of the curve and waving that flag. If I think about the industry and my 20 plus years in it, I think about on probably the NAPFA, the National Association of Personal Financial Advisors, back in the day, kind of the fee only organization. And I think about FI360. I would argue that your two organizations have probably done more within the industry for advancing fiduciary practices and principles than anybody else. So just a ton of admiration for you from that perspective. So John, this has been a really fun discussion. One of the things I tend to like to ask at the end of an episode is to ask guests what their single most important piece of advice would be for advisors. So I'll kind of pass the ball to you, and would love to get kind of your thoughts on your single best piece of advice.
Wow. I'd say, do the right thing. And, I've got so much admiration for the financial advising community. I guess maybe one thing that I would say that's maybe a little bit unique is please engage your vendors, your software vendors, your training vendors. There's a lot of admiration for what financial advisors do from a lot of us that work in the industry. And a lot of the ideas that we get for new offerings and advancements come from individual advisors. So I'm very grateful for the relationships that I've got with more than a handful of advisors who reach out to me on a regular basis and give me really good constructive criticism. So I'm appreciative for that engagement, and appreciative for what they do to help people, live better lives financially. It's a really important job that they have. It's a very needed job, and it's one that I'm happy to support.
I think that's great advice too. Is even thinking about vendor relationships on the technology side is don't think about as if you're an advisor, think about your technology providers as partners, not vendors. In the same way that you don't want to be a vendor to your clients, you want to be a partner. Think about that same thing. And, to kind of echo what John's saying, and even from my perspective now is you've got technology partners. At the end of the day, we want to build things that you value and you want. So I think that's awesome feedback, John, that an awesome insight just in terms of help the people who want to support you if you're an advisor. Give them the feedback and the guidance so that they can create the things that are going to help you help your clients and help you build better practices. So, John, this has been a lot of fun and really, really good insights. I've had a long-standing history with FI360 and have appreciated our friendship. And I just wish you continued success and really encourage you to keep up the good fight and wave that banner for fiduciary practices and principles that you're doing. So thank you so much for coming on and being a guest.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And right back at you, Josh. I've got great respect for you professionally, personally, and you're someone who's really carried that fiduciary banner kind of on their own. And I've got a lot of respect for you doing it individually. I walked into a situation, FI360's up and running and built, and I came there, but great respect for what you've done individually for all your peers in the industry.